Alien bride Lana thought her fate was sealed the moment she was sold to a human merchant in a desperate attempt to save her family's failing greenhouse. But when she meets Ethan Carter, the groom she's been promised to, everything she believed about this arrangement shatters. His green eyes hold secrets she never expected, secrets that could change everything. Was this just a transaction, or is there more to Ethan's intentions than she ever imagined? As her two hearts race with confusion, Lana must decide. Can she trust the man who is supposed to be her captor, or is there a darker truth lurking beneath his charming exterior? Don't miss the twists and turns of this intense, heart-pounding sci-fi saga. Subscribe now to stay updated on every thrilling chapter. Lana stood by the crystal window of her family's treetop home, her breath fogging the smooth surface as she stared out into the glowing wilderness of Serenith. The rainforest stretched endlessly below, its bioluminescent trees pulsing softly in shades of teal and violet under the twin moons. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, her turquoise skin shimmering with faint ripples of light, an outward sign of the storm brewing inside her. Beyond the canopy, a sleek human trade ship, the Stellar Dawn, pierced through the misty air, its engines humming as it descended. Each thud of its landing gear sent a jolt of dread through her, vibrating up her spine like a warning. Today was the day her life would change forever. "Time to go, Lana." Her father's voice rasped from behind her, heavy with guilt. Kale Vera shuffled closer, his once vibrant skin now dulled by age and worry. The glowing patterns faded like dying embers. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Lana didn't turn around. "How much did you get from me, father?" Her voice was steady, cutting through the humid air like a blade. "Was it enough to save your precious greenhouse? To fix a mess you made?" Kale flinched as if she'd struck him. "It's not like that, daughter. This is a marriage alliance, a chance to settle our debts with the humans. Ethan Carter is a fair man, a merchant from Earth. He'll treat you well." She spun to face him, her silver hair whipping around her shoulders, the glowing strands catching the dim light of the room. "Don't twist this into something noble. You sold me to a stranger to pay for your failed experiments." Her skin flared brighter, turquoise waves racing across her arms in angry pulses. "You gambled on those hybrid plants, and now I'm the price." Kale's shoulders sagged. The alternative was losing everything. The greenhouse, our home, your mother's legacy. I had no choice. No choice. Lana's laugh was bitter. The Lyrith value freedom and bonding above all else. "You've stolen that from me." Before he could respond, she stormed toward the wooden chest in the corner, her bare feet slapping against the polished floor. The chest held her few belongings, a silver comb, a pouch of glowing seeds, a woven bracelet from her mother. As she reached for it, the damp wood betrayed her. Her foot slipped, and she stumbled forward with a gasp. Kale lunged to catch her, his hands gripping her arms. But in the chaos, one hand slid too high, brushing against her chest through the thin fabric of her tunic. Heat flooded her face, her skin flaring brighter as she shoved him away, heart pounding. "Don't touch me," she snapped, stepping back, her breath ragged. The air between them thickened with shame and silence. Kale pulled his hands back, muttering, "I didn't mean," but he stopped, unable to finish. The damage was done. A soft knock broke the tension. The woven curtain parted, and Mira, Lana's younger sister, stepped in, her small frame dwarfed by the shimmering silver gown she carried. At 16, Myra's skin still glowed with the vivid patterns of youth, but her large, twilight-purple eyes were rimmed with tears that glittered like stars. "Your wedding dress," she whispered, holding it out. The fabric shimmered, woven with Lyrith symbols of unity, mocking Lana with their irony. Lana took the gown, her fingers tracing the delicate threads. It was beautiful, like the night sky woven into cloth, but it felt like a chain. She glanced at Mira, whose lip trembled, and forced a tight smile. "Will you help me get ready?" Mira nodded, following her to the small alcove where a reflective vine hung on the wall. As Mira worked, brushing Lana's silver hair and pinning it with tiny, glowing crystals from Serenith's caves, Lana caught her reflection. Her almond-shaped eyes, deep purple with silver flecks, stared back, fierce yet fragile. Her skin's patterns swirled like rivers of light across her shoulders, a mark of her bloodline. She barely recognized herself in this moment. Not a daughter, not a sister, but a bride bartered away. "You're beautiful," Mira said softly, securing the last crystal. "Like the moons come to life." Lana squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm doing this for you too, little sprout. For your future." Myra's tears spilled over, luminous drops falling to the floor, and Lana wiped them away. "We don't always pick our paths, but we can choose how we walk them." The ceremonial chimes echoed through the treetop home, a low, haunting sound that signaled the human's arrival. Lana's two hearts, unique to the Lyrith, beat faster, nearly sinking in her rising panic. She smoothed the gown over her hips, the fabric clinging softly to her curves, and took a deep breath. "It's time," she murmured, stepping out of the alcove. Cale waited by the door, his head bowed. "He's here in the garden. Ethan Carter." His voice cracked, but Lana brushed past him without a word, her bare feet sinking into the mossy path that led outside. The garden glowed under the twin moons, a circle of towering ferns and luminescent flowers casting shifting shadows. And there he stood, Ethan Carter, taller than she'd imagined, with broad shoulders and a stance that spoke of quiet strength. His bronze skin caught the moonlight, his dark brown hair curling slightly at the edges. When he turned, his eyes, green as Serenith's deepest forests, met hers, and something flickered in them. Nervousness? Curiosity? Lana couldn't tell, but it wasn't the arrogance she'd feared. Her father cleared his throat. "Merchant Carter, this is my daughter, Lana Vera, keeper of our family's knowledge." Ethan bowed slightly, a clumsy but earnest attempt at the Lyrith greeting. "I'm honored," he said, his voice deep and warm, the Lyrith words rolling off his tongue with a strange, musical lilt. He stepped forward, and Lana braced herself. This was no alliance. This was a transaction, and she was the payment. But as his gaze lingered on her, soft and searching, a tiny crack formed in her wall of anger. Who was this man, really? And what did he want with her? The garden's glowing ferns swayed gently as Lana stepped into the circle of light, her silver gown shimmering with every movement. The air smelled of damp earth and sweet nectar, thick with the hum of Serenith's night creatures. Her two hearts thudded unevenly, one racing with anger, the other heavy with resignation. She lifted her chin, forcing her glowing skin to settle into calm, steady patterns. She wouldn't let this human see her fear. Ethan Carter stood beside her father, his green eyes catching the moonlight as he watched her approach. He wasn't what she'd expected. No cold, calculating stare. No smug grin of ownership. Instead, he shifted his weight, hands clasped behind his back, looking almost as uneasy as she felt. His earth-made tunic stretched across his broad chest, simple but well-fitted, and his dark hair ruffled slightly in the breeze. For a moment, Lana wondered what kind of man flew across the stars to claim a stranger. Cale's voice broke the silence, formal and strained. "Merchant Carter, this is my daughter, Lana Vera, keeper of our family's knowledge." He gestured toward her, avoiding her gaze. Ethan stepped forward and dipped into a Lyrith bow, awkward but practiced. "I'm honored," he said, his deep voice wrapping around her language like a song. The accent was strange, softening the sharp edges of the words, but he spoke fluently. It startled her. How long had he studied her people to sound like that? The elder, a wiry Lyrith with skin like cracked bark, shuffled into the circle, holding a cord of glowing vine. "The joining begins," he intoned, his voice a low rumble. Lana extended her hands, palms up, as custom demanded. Ethan hesitated, just a heartbeat, before placing his hands over hers. His skin was warm, almost hot against her cool touch, and the contact sent a jolt through her, sharp and unexpected. She stiffened, her breath catching as his fingers brushed too low for a moment, grazing the curve of her hip through the thin gown. Her skin flared briefly, a ripple of turquoise light betraying her surprise, and she pulled back slightly. Ethan's eyes widened, a flush creeping up his neck as he adjusted his grip. "Sorry," he muttered under his breath, barely audible over the elder's chant. Lana kept her face blank, though her pulse raced. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The elder wrapped the glowing cord around their wrists, binding them together. "What debt was owed is now balanced by this union," he declared. The words stung like thorns. Balanced? She was a living ledger, handed over to erase her father's mistakes. When the cord tightened, she dared to look up. Ethan's gaze met hers, steady but unreadable. Was that guilt in his eyes? Concern? She couldn't tell, and it only fueled the fire simmering inside her. The ceremony ended quickly. Vows of loyalty and respect exchanged in hollow tones. By Lyrith and human law, she was now Lana Vera Carter, his wife. The thought twisted her stomach. "Your things are on Merchant Carter's ship," Cale said, still avoiding her eyes. "You leave within the hour." "So soon?" Lana's voice cracked, panic rising. She'd barely have time to hug Mira goodbye, let alone bid farewell to the greenhouse workers who'd become her family. Ethan cleared his throat, his Lyrith careful but firm. "If I may, I'd like to offer Lana time to say goodbye properly. We can leave tomorrow at dawn instead." Cale blinked, surprised. "That's generous of you." Lana's eyes narrowed. Generous? Or a trick to seem kind? She didn't trust it, or him. The elder and Cale retreated, leaving them alone in the garden's alcove, a Lyrith custom for newly bonded pairs to reflect. The silence stretched, heavy as the humid air. "You speak our tongue well," she said finally, her tone sharp as she kept her distance, arms crossed over her chest. Ethan nodded, leaning against a glowing fern. "I've traded with Serenith for 5 years. It'd be bad business not to learn." "Is that what I am? Business?" The words slipped out, bitter and raw. His jaw tightened, green eyes flashing. "This wasn't my idea. Your father owed my family a fortune, plants that never grew, debts that piled up. This was his solution, not mine." Her skin pulsed with indignation. "And you couldn't say no to such a prize, an exotic Lyrith bride?" "I said yes, because the alternative was your family losing everything. Your home, your mother's greenhouse." His voice softened, almost too quiet. "I don't expect you to believe me, but you're not property to me. You'll have freedom on my ship. I won't force anything from you." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard, a crack in her defenses. She studied him, his steady gaze, the way he didn't crowd her space. Fine words, she thought, but words were cheap. Actions told the truth. A rustle in the ferns made her turn. She glimpsed Cale speaking to a shadowed figure near the trees, their voices low. "Carter might want her energy," Cale whispered, the words barely reaching her ears. Her heart skipped. Energy? Did he mean the Nong Luong Lyrith, the secret power in her blood? She glanced at Ethan, who hadn't noticed, his eyes on the moons above. Doubt coiled tighter around her. What game was this human playing? And what did he really know about her? The next morning, the twin moons of Serenith faded into the misty dawn as Lana followed Ethan aboard the Stellar Dawn. Her silver gown had been traded for a simple Lyrith tunic, its fabric soft against her glowing skin, but her steps were heavy with reluctance. The ship loomed over the forest clearing, its sleek metal hull a stark contrast to the organic curves of Serenith's trees. She clutched a small woven bag, her few belongings, and cast a final glance at the treetop home shrinking behind her. Myra's tearful wave lingered in her mind, a tether to everything she was leaving. Ethan walked ahead, his strides long but slower than she'd expected, as if giving her space. "This way," he said, gesturing toward a ramp. His voice was steady, but his green eyes flicked to her, searching for something. Approval? Trust? She offered neither, her lips pressed into a thin line. Inside, the Stellar Dawn surprised her. The corridors curved like Lyrith architecture, lined with panels carved with Serenith's spiral patterns. Potted plants with glowing fronds, native to her world, dotted the halls, their light mingling with the ship's warm glow. It wasn't the cold, sterile vessel she'd imagined. My father believed a ship should reflect the worlds it visits, Ethan explained, catching her stare. He built this with artisans from 3 systems. Lana trailed her fingers along a wall, the familiar symbols grounding her. Your father had taste, she said stiffly, unwilling to give more. He led her to a door that slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a spacious room. A wide viewport framed Serenith's receding forests, and the furniture blended human practicality with Lyrith elegance. Curved chairs, a bed draped in shimmering fabric, even a small, glowing tree in the corner. Your quarters, Ethan said. I had it adjusted for you. Cooler air, higher humidity, like home. She stepped inside, her bare feet sinking into the moss-like rug. You prepared this for me? The question slipped out, laced with suspicion. Ethan shrugged, his expression neutral. I did when I knew you were coming. He pointed to a door on the far wall. My room's next door, connected, but with locks on both sides. I meant what I said, Lana. This marriage is on paper. I won't demand anything. Relief flickered through her, her skin pulsing softly. Thank you, she murmured, turning to the viewport. Serenith shrank to a glowing orb, and the artificial gravity tugged at her, slightly heavier than home. She unpacked her bag, the comb, the seeds, the bracelet, each item a piece of her old life. The glowing tree from Mira caught her eye, and her throat tightened. Homesickness hit like a wave. A chime interrupted her thoughts. Lana Vera Carter. A woman's voice crackled through a speaker. I'm Mara Lynn, ship's medic. Ethan suggested I show you around. Care to see the medical bay? Lana hesitated, then agreed. Anything to escape her spiraling thoughts. The medical bay was small but advanced, stocked with tools she didn't recognize. Mara, a wiry human with cropped gray hair, waved her in. Most trade ships skimp on this stuff, but Ethan insists on the best. We help whoever we find. Refugees, wanderers. You help them? Lana asked, examining a sleek scanner. When we can. Mara grinned. Ethan's got a soft spot for it. Not always good for profit, but it's who he is. Before Lana could reply, the ship shuddered. Slipstream jump, Mara said, steadying herself. First time, Lana nodded, gripping the scanner as a wave of dizziness hit. The room tilted, her vision blurring at the edges. Her skin flickered wildly, patterns spiraling in distress. She stumbled, legs buckling, and a strong hand caught her arm. Ethan. He'd appeared from nowhere, his grip firm as she sagged against him. In the chaos, his hand slipped, brushing across her chest through the tunic. Heat flared in her cheeks, her skin glowing brighter as she gasped. I'm fine, she stammered, pulling away, but her knees wobbled. You're not, Ethan said, concern etching his face. He guided her to a chair, his touch lingering on her arm. Mara, what's happening? Her Lyrith physiology's fighting the slipstream, Mara said, scanning Lana with a device. 2 hearts, sensitive to spatial shifts. It's uncomfortable, not dangerous. Ethan knelt beside her, his warmth a steady anchor. Can we help? Lana gritted her teeth, the dizziness swirling. There's a way. Lyrith trick. I need to sync my hearts with yours. One rhythm. She hated asking, but the nausea was unbearable. Tell me, he said, no hesitation. Hands on my temples, she instructed, closing her eyes. Breathe with me, slow, steady. He obeyed, his palms warm against her cool skin, gentle but firm. She focused on a single heartbeat, strong and even, and willed her dual rhythms to align. Their breaths synced. Inhale, exhale, and slowly the spinning faded. Her skin steadied, glowing softly again. But something else slipped through the connection, a faint echo of Ethan's mind. Loneliness, deep and raw, and a flash of memory. A woman with kind eyes, laughing among Serenith's trees. His mother. She opened her eyes, startled. He was watching her, close enough that she felt his breath on her cheek. Better, he asked, voice soft. Yes, she whispered, aware of his hand still on her. Thank you. He pulled back slowly, and she missed the warmth more than she'd admit. Rest, he said, standing. First jumps are rough. As he left with Mara, A Lyrith crewman lingered by the door, his eyes narrowing. "Carter's no saint," he muttered. "He pushed your father into that debt. Wanted you all along." Lana's heart skipped. Was it true? The connection with Ethan lingered in her mind, a fragile thread. She didn't know what to believe. Lana sat alone in the medical bay after Ethan and Mara left, her fingers tracing the edge of the chair where his warmth still lingered. The Lyrith crewman's words echoed in her mind. "He pushed your father into that debt. Wanted you all along." Her two hearts beat out of sync again, one thudding with doubt, the other tugging toward the faint connection she'd felt during the slipstream. Ethan's loneliness had seeped into her, real and raw. But was it a trick? She needed answers. The stellar dawn hummed softly, docked at Serenith's edge for one last trade run before departure. Lana slipped out of the bay, her bare feet silent on the mossy floor, and headed for Ethan's quarters. The adjacent door slid open with a whisper. She'd noticed he never locked it. Inside, the room mirrored hers. Curved furniture, a glowing plant, a viewport showing the forest's teal glow. But a small desk caught her eye, cluttered with datapads. She hesitated, then tapped one awake. A file flickered to life. Lyrith Energy Project. Her breath hitched. Skimming the text, she saw references to her people's unique bioenergy, the Nong Luong Lyrith, a power her mother had taught her to hide. The Carters had studied it decades ago, hoping to harness it for profit. One line chilled her. Subject acquisition recommended. The date was old, signed by Ethan's father, but a newer note followed. Project terminated. EC Ethan's initials. Her skin flared, turquoise light rippling in jagged waves. He knew. She grabbed the pad and stormed to the bridge, where Ethan stood over a console, his back to her. "Explain this," she snapped, shoving the screen at him. He turned, green eyes widening as he scanned it. "Lana, don't lie." Her voice trembled. "Your family hunted my people's energy. Was this the plan all along? Get me on your ship, use me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That was my father's idea, not mine. He saw your kind as a resource. I didn't. I shut it down when he died." He stepped closer, voice low. "I took this deal to save your greenhouse, not to exploit you." She pushed him, her palms slamming into his chest. He stumbled back, catching himself against the console, but his hand grazed her hip in the shuffle, brushing the curve of her backside through the tunic. Her skin pulsed brighter, heat flooding her face as she jerked away. "Don't touch me," she hissed, though her voice wavered. The air crackled with tension, his nearness unnerving her more than she'd admit. "Believe what you want," he said, steadying himself, "but I'm not him." Before she could retort, the ship jolted violently. Alarms blared, red lights flashing. "What's happening?" Lana demanded, gripping the wall as the floor tilted. Ethan tapped the console, his face grim. "We're under attack, ground level. Raiders from the forest." Shouts echoed through the corridors as crew scrambled. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Stay here. It's safer." "No," she snapped, pulling free. "If they're after me, I'm not hiding." She followed him to the ramp, where the humid air of Serenith rushed in. Outside, a dozen Lyrith raiders, outcasts with scarred, dulled skin, swarmed from the trees, wielding crude blades and stolen tech. Their leader, a hulking figure with a jagged scar across his face, barked orders. "Find the Vera girl. Her energy's worth a fortune to the Shadow clans." Ethan cursed under his breath. "They're tied to your father's old partners." Kale must have talked. The raiders charged, and chaos erupted. Ethan shoved Lana behind a crate as a blade whistled past. "Stay down," he yelled, drawing a slim pistol from his belt. He fired, dropping one attacker, but another lunged, slashing his arm. Blood welled, dark against his bronze skin, and he grunted, staggering back. Lana's heart raced. She couldn't let him die. Not yet, not like this. She darted out, dodging a raider's grab, and reached Ethan as he fell to his knees. "Hold still," she said, pressing her hands to his wound. Her skin glowed brighter, energy surging from her core. The Nong Luong Lyrith flowed, a secret she'd guarded since childhood, knitting his flesh closed. The effort left her dizzy, her glow dimming as she sank beside him. Ethan stared, awe and pain mixing in his eyes. "You healed me?" "Shut up," she muttered, breathless. The raiders closed in, but the crew rallied, driving them back with coordinated fire. The leader snarled, retreating into the trees as the last of his band fell or fled. Ethan gripped her shoulder, pulling her up. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't do it for you," she lied, avoiding his gaze. Her skin still tingled where his hand rested, warm and steady. Back on the ship, the crew sealed the ramp, and Ethan led her to the medical bay, his arm bandaged but functional. Mara bustled over, scanning him, but he waved her off. "I'm Fina. Check Lana." She pushed herself. "I'm not fragile," Lana protested, though her legs wobbled. Ethan sat across from her, his voice dropping. "Those raiders wanted your energy. I didn't know Kale sold you out to them too." Her eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe you're innocent in all this?" "No," he said, meeting her stare. "But I'm not your enemy. When I saw you in that garden, I didn't want your power. I wanted—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I've been alone a long time, Lana. You're strong, fiercer than anyone I've met. That's why I couldn't let you go." Her breath caught, his words slicing through her defenses. The connection from the slipstream flared in her memory, his loneliness mirroring hers. Was he telling the truth? She wanted to scoff, to push him away, but something in his green eyes held her, raw, unguarded. Mara cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "You two sort this out later. We're prepping to leave Serenith. Raiders might come back." Ethan nodded, standing. "Rest, Lana. We'll talk when you're ready." As he walked away, Lana sank into the chair, her skin pulsing faintly. She'd saved him, exposed her secret, and now he'd bared a piece of his soul. Trust still felt miles away, but a tiny spark flickered inside her. Curiosity, maybe even hope. What was this human doing to her? The medical bay of the Stellar Dawn buzzed with quiet activity as Mara finished patching up the crew from the raider attack. Lana sat on a cushioned bench, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her skin glowing faintly after the strain of healing Ethan. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor. They'd lifted off Serenith, leaving the glowing forest and its dangers behind. Her two hearts still beat unevenly, torn between the chaos she'd just survived and Ethan's words echoing in her mind. "I didn't want your power. I wanted—" He hadn't finished, but the weight of it lingered. Ethan stepped in, his arm now wrapped in a clean bandage, his green eyes softer than she'd seen before. He moved with a slight limp, favoring his uninjured side, and settled onto the bench across from her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Lana nodded, though her hands tightened in her lap. "I've had worse days." She glanced at him, searching his face. The man who'd fought raiders for her, who'd bled for her, didn't look like a schemer. But trust was a fragile thing, and she'd been burned too many times. Mara bustled past, muttering about supplies, leaving them in a pocket of silence. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I meant what I said back there, Lana. You're free to go. Anywhere, anytime. I'll get you a shuttle, credits, whatever you need. This ship, my family's debts, it doesn't have to chain you." Her breath caught. Freedom. The word dangled like a lifeline, tempting her to run back to Serenith, to Mira, to the life she'd known. But his offer came with a cost. Leaving him meant he'd lose everything. The ship, his trade routes, maybe even his crew's loyalty. She studied him, the lines of exhaustion on his face, the sincerity in his gaze. "Why?" she asked. "Why give me that choice now?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because I'd rather lose it all than keep you here against your will. You're not a prize to me, Lana. You're you." The words hit harder than she expected, cracking the wall she'd built around herself. She stood, needing to move, and crossed to the medical scanner where his blood still stained the edge. "You're a fool, Ethan Carter," she said, her voice trembling. "A fool who nearly died out there." "Maybe," he chuckled, rising too, "but I'd do it again." She turned, and he was closer than she'd realized, his warmth radiating through the small space. She reached to adjust his bandage, her healer's instincts kicking in, but as she leaned in, her chest brushed his shoulder through the thin tunic. Her skin flared softly, a ripple of light betraying the jolt that ran through her. Ethan froze, his breath hitching, and for a moment, neither moved, the air thick with unspoken things. "Sorry," she murmured, stepping back, her face warm. "Don't be," he said, voice rough, but he didn't push closer. Respect again. It disarmed her. Lana took a shaky breath, her hand finding his. Her glowing fingers laced through his, the contrast of their skin, turquoise against bronze, striking in the dim light. "I'm staying," she said finally, the decision settling like a stone in her chest. "Not just for my family, but I want to see what this ship can do. What we can do." Ethan's eyes widened, then softened. "You mean that?" "Yes. Your crew helps people, refugees, outcasts. If my energy can make that better, I'll use it. With you." She squeezed his hand, feeling his pulse steady beneath her touch. He nodded, a spark of hope lighting his face. "We'll make it work. Together." A soft ping broke the moment. A message blinked on the console, Myra's voice, recorded and faint. "Lana, father's gone. He left with some lyrith I didn't recognize. Said something about the bloodline. Be careful." The line cut off. Lana's heart skipped. "The bloodline?" she whispered. Her energy, Kale's disappearance, was it all connected? Ethan frowned. "We'll find him. Whatever he's tangled in, we'll face it." She met his gaze, the spark inside her growing. Fear still lingered, about Kale, about her power, but alongside it was something new, a fragile trust, a shared path. As the stellar dawn sailed into the stars, Lana realized she wasn't just a bride sold for dead anymore. She was a partner, choosing her fate, and maybe, just maybe, the man beside her,